And one of the things I brought up in my interview was the fact that I wanted to bring science to Uncorked February. So a year later, here we are. Isn't that fun? Thank you so much. We have a wonderful partnership throughout the years with Cal State University, Monterey Bay. I'm so used to saying everything's in letters, CSUMB. They work with us with research every single year. So we do the watershed report card. We do last year we did wildfire research, all sorts of different things. John is head of that program for us. And so he's going to be helping us tonight talking about this particular topic. Let me just tell you a little bit about John. John Olson is an associate professor of freshwater ecology at California State University, Monterey Bay. He studies the ecology of streams and rivers and how they are influenced by the landscape around them. He examines freshwater ecosystems using a variety of tools like DNA, satellites, and models to better understand how they function. He then applies this knowledge to developing ways to improve the management and health of rivers, lakes, and wetlands. Some of his recent projects include modeling water chemistry to establish nutrient criteria nationwide, examining the effects of river restoration, using environmental DNA and models to monitor and manage endangered species, and investigating the effects of new contaminants like microplastics. Thank you for doing that. John has been visiting family in the Carmel Valley area since he was a child and lived in Carmel when he was stationed at Fort Ord in the 90s. Normally, we just walk over and start after that, but I forgot something. I just want to say there's a sign-up sheet here, and one of the things on that sign-up sheet is a section for suggestions for future talks. So please tell us what else you would like to know. And we're launching a new website next week where you'll learn all sorts of things about us. We'll take a look at it. John, I pass it to you.
Thank you, Elise. So we start off by making sure that if I can't be here, go to the back of the room if I start all points. If you throw something at me or let me know that I'm not reaching all the way back. Also, please, as I go along, ask questions, stop and ask questions as we go. I have slides. I don't have much in the way of data. I was told, graphs and figures don't mix well with wine. So I have a reasonable number of pictures. We talk about, the outcomes in terms of what happened to dam. So as we mentioned, I'm a freshwater ecologist. I come to the problem from not just from a fish perspective or a bug perspective or an algae perspective, but looking at the entire ecosystem, how the entire ecosystem operates. And dams is one of the things that have had an impact on freshwater ecosystems for a long time. Actually, they're pretty well studied. We understand what dams do in a lot of ways. And we know they change the flow of water. That's why we built them, right? We built dams basically to store water, capture the big floods and store the floods for when it gets dry, so we have water when it gets dry. So that's one of the primary reasons we build dams around here. Obviously, we do multiple hydropower, but flood control and hydropower are basically two big reasons. And we're just basically changing the hydrograph. We're making the flow of the river more steady over time. We're taking the right ways from the peaks and valleys out of the flow. Dams also affect the flow of sediment. We don't build them to affect the flow of sediment. Well, in some places like down in LA and some places in desert, they actually do build sediment basins. But primarily, we don't necessarily build dams just to manage sediment, but dams block sediment. One of my professors, when I was learning hydrology and geomorphology, he had a bumper sticker and said, "Silt happens." Because every dam you build, as soon as you close that dam, it begins silting up behind it. And that's the fact we're destructing the sediment actually has an impact both above the dam and below the dam. I'll talk more about those. It obviously affects the flow of animals and plants. I was for those people back there the dam. But anyway, cool. So obviously fish life cycles actually require them to move, even if they're not anatomous and they're not actually going to the ocean. Fish often want to be able to move between different environments. They'll live in smaller streams in one part of the year or one part of the life cycle, and they'll move to larger streams later in their life cycle. So movement for fish is actually really important, key part of their survival strategy. They're designed basically to move one place to another place. They don't actually stay in one place their entire lives. Even insects will actually move downstream, usually 20 or 30 kilometers over the course of their lifetime. They're taking advantage of the fact that in order to move water, they can actually move themselves downstream and find new environments by just letting go of the rock they're on and flying downstream. So animals really depend on rivers to move around. If you put a dam in, then no longer you're basically disrupting the movement of animals. And this disruption then prevents the animals from actually, accomplishing their life cycle in some ways. We don't often talk about it, we don't think about it, but nutrients are also affected by dams. What happens if you put a dam in, above the dam you get essentially a reservoir or a lake. But a lake, lakes operate different than rivers. Right? So lakes have to have algae, phytoplankton growing in the water column and settle out and sink to the bottom and get trapped as sediment at the bottom. So the water that released from the dam actually has less nutrients in it than water that enters through the top of the reservoir. So you're actually removing nutrients by having a dam and locking all the nutrients basically in the mud at the bottom of the dam. So these are the four things that basically will change the flow on, and when we put a dam in. There's also changes to the habitat, right? So above the dam, like I mentioned, we all can picture the fact that you put a dam in, essentially above the dam, you create a lake. You change a river into a lake, which you can't imagine a greater change in the habitat than to go from moving water to not moving water. Right? It also affects the downstream, though. So what happens is when we stop that sediment flow, the fine sediments downstream get washed out. But what you end up is in a process called bed armoring, where essentially all the fine sediments get washed out, all you're left with is big rocks. The size of the channel get put with these big rocks, get armored. Basically, the channel becomes like a concrete channel, like the LA River. Not, but instead of having concrete, we just got a big bunch of big rocks doing the same thing. So you no longer have all the fine particles that you need to provide actual habitat for bugs and fish and algae. Temperature is also greatly affected by dams. So when you put that dam in, the water behind the dam, the lake, stratifies. So you guys have most of you probably been on a lake at some point. You notice somewhere at the top here is warm and your feet are freezing, right? That's because the warm water will all bubble to the surface of the lake, cold water will sink to the bottom. So you end up having a stratification of the lake. So you have that change in temperature above the dam. What happens is when water is released from the dam, if it's released from the bottom, it comes out really cold. Usually it comes out somewhere around 4 degrees C, which is about 20 degrees. It really comes out relatively cold water at the bottom of the dam. Or if you release from the top of it, it comes out really warm. So you're changing the temperature. The problem with changing the temperature is when you think about all the organisms that live in a river, most of the organisms that live in a river are going to be cold-blooded. Cold-blooded animals are really affected by what temperature they live in. If they live in a temperature that's warmer than they're used to, they'll be affected because they'll grow up too fast and they'll basically mature too early. But if they're colder than they're used to, they'll basically grow too slow. So they've been adapted to a certain temperature, and these dams change temperature, they're decreasing temperature or dropping temperature depending on how the dam operates. So dams have been known to have all these effects for quite some time. But now we're at a time where we're finally beginning to remove dams. We're at the point now we've already removed more than 1,000 dams across the U.S. And every year, we're seeing increases. This is showing you up through 2020. We went past 2020, you see that this is continuing to increase. And we're seeing larger and larger dams come down and more dams. So understanding how the effects of removing dams and how they have fully these effects is an important part of research. So just a little background on the Carmel San Clemente Dam, if you haven't heard it before already. The San Clemente Dam, there are two dams that were built, one in 1883, and then the San Clemente Dam we're really talking about was built in 1921. The 1883 dam was a small low-head dam about as big as I am. But the dam, the 1921 dam is over 100 feet tall. And at that point, it was built to basically support the Hotel Del Monte in the seaside of Monterey. And it really became the principal water source for the peninsula. So, a huge pipe that ran from San Clemente Dam and went down to the peninsula. But it really made a water source for the first 100 years of its use. But, and it went into decline. The picture here on the left, upper left, is showing you the dam, the reservoir in 1994. And the picture on the right is 2002. And you can basically see that the dark area where the water's at is basically all gone by 2002. Right? Basically, the entire dam silted in behind it and just became full sediment. Silt happens. And also, this the dam has been known to affect, well, it still hasn't been competent regulated fraud. There was a fish ladder for the dam, but the fish ladder was not able, fish ladders help fish go over a dam, but they're not as effective as, actually, have fish to actually travel up the river. Fish ladder, there's no fish ladder that's 100% effective in allowing fish to move up over a dam. So for these reasons, and back then there's also an earthquake out there, they decided to remove the dam. So this is a picture of the dam just prior to its removal. If you look upstream above the dam, you can see the area of sediment, right? The sediment's almost all the way up to the edge of the dam. So essentially, everything beyond that will just, floodplain, really. So the San Clemente Dam was the largest dam removal in California at the time, and it's now been the largest dam removal since then. So in 2016, when it first came down, it was the largest, and it had a very unique way they brought it down. So this is showing you the Carmel River. The Carmel River basically flows north at this point, and then this is just a couple miles from here, actually. The orange line here shows you the river originally routed. So it originally went on this way and joined San Clemente Creek here where the star is at. That's where the dam was. It's called San Clemente Dam because of San Clemente Creek came into the river at that point. It was decided, though, to actually move the river from this orange line to the purple line and basically push it over into San Clemente Creek and basically put a hole through the ridge there. So the ridge that occurs right there. And basically, we just excavated that ridge and moved the river through to the bridge into San Clemente Creek. And basically bypassed all the sediment that's along the original route, all the sediment was left behind, and we just bypassed it and went around it. When you remove dams, all the sediment that's behind the dam all of a sudden gets evacuated, right? You basically have all these fine materials ended up in the river. And this pulse of fine sediment basically moves down the river. And basically, as the river goes from being nothing but boulders to being nothing but sand, which is just as bad as nothing but boulders. So, in order to avoid that problem, we basically went around the sand, left all the sand in place, and built a river. So, this picture on the right, a picture of the river after it's been basically we created a artificial, if you will. Instead of set pools, what we wanted to do is we wanted to basically allow fish to make them travel up the river relatively easy. So a little jump, a little jump, a little jump, a little jump as they move up river. This is basically imitating a formation that happens called step pool. So step pool formations occur in where you have large gradients. So the step pool allows the fish to basically jump from one step to the next. So a lot of money was spent building a step pool formation. And that was how when they brought the dam down, they built this new step pool formation. Well, let's get part of that one. And here's where we basically stored the sediment, right? So this is showing you the same picture. Dam used to be right here. I showed you a picture looking up. We saw the sediment. Here's where the sediment is basically left in place. They basically revegetated the hill slope. And the river now goes this direction, goes around the sediment. Sediment's basically stored in place. And this is an aerial photograph of this area. So here is where the old river used to be. It's all been stored in the river. This is where the dam used to be. This is where the current channel is. And these are all the step pools I showed you those pictures of. That pool is going up. channel. So that's what it looked like when they were completed, and they completed the restoration. So this was 2016, that point. 2017, we had essentially a 20-year flood. It wasn't a really big flood, but it was a really small one. It was probably a 20-year flood. And you can see essentially all the engineering that was done to build this step formation. Yeah, so the river said, "Thank you very much for the toys," and went out. The rocks in the boulders did its thing. So now we're left with the question of, well, did this restoration actually improve things for the biota we care about, or did it make things worse? Another picture of this. Show you another example of this. So this is a view in 2016 of the step pool formation. This is a 2017 during the tail end of the high flows. And this is what it looked like in the year after that. And so basically, all the boulders and all the formation they built just got more apart and rearranged. So in terms of the effects of the San Clemente removal, well, in terms of the flow of water, we basically restored natural flow of water. There's the river flows freely, finally, and it reaches the sea. Sediment is a little bit different story. So when we talk about sediment, I talked about the fact that we need a mixture of sediments. One of the most important sediments I have is what we call spawning gravels. So these gravels here and here. So spawning gravels are basically gravels that are usually something bigger than your thumb, up to about your fist size, or maybe a little larger, right? So we want relatively large, stable sediments. These are what steelhead used to build their nests or their redds. So steelhead will basically go through. This is a picture of a red here. You might have seen this before, where you have a spot where all the algae has been scoured away. What happens is that the steelhead fish will swim up a likely spot. They basically swim back and forth violently and basically kick gravel up. And they kick all the gravel up and build a pile of gravel. They actually lay their eggs into that pile of gravel, just upstream of where the hole is at that. So they want gravels that are going to be relatively large and stable. They don't want the gravels moving with water. But they have to be small enough that they can move them. So boulders, they can't move boulders. So they still have strong fish, but they can't move a boulder. So they need something that is spawning gravel just that's basically the right size. So we've seen small increases in spawning gravels, but they're really small and relatively modest increases in spawning gravels. So the reason why we might have that, Los Padres Dam is just upstream of San Clemente Dam. So we've removed one dam on the river, there's another river upstream that's still blocking the flow of sediment into San Clemente Dam. Also, the debris flows that you guys have heard debris flows, obviously, if we live in a fire-prone area. Debris flows we see after the fires every year, bring sediments into the rivers and bring these spawning gravels. So actually, we had the Carmel River. We actually looked at the effects of the Carmel River fire on the San Clemente Dam. The Carmel fire, basically came down to within about a quarter mile of where the dam used to be, and we had debris flows entering the river right there. And basically, we went and looked to see if we have spawning gravel after the last big flood. With debris flows into the river. Basically, so the debris flows entered the river and disappeared. Essentially, there's no trace of the gravels that were entered in the river. They entered the river just sucked them up and washed them downstream. The river is so starved for sediment, a little bit of sediment shows up and it was just basically sucked up and used right away. So the our debris flows, right now there's still not enough sediment to actually reestablish the flow of sediment that goes through the area. So sediment is still a bit of we're moving in the right direction, but we're not moving quickly enough. Looking at the flow of animals and plants, there's been a slight improvement in steelhead movement. We do see more adult steelhead moving upstream all the way to Los Padres Dam, but it's relatively modest. So we've gone from averaging maybe 20 or 30 fish, maybe 40, 50, 60 fish. So it's nothing, we're not talking about the thousands of fish that still had used to be have we're talking, tens of fish. And tens of fish could be basically be caused by differences in what year was God will be in, how we had fires, what other effects of what so we have those seen spawning upstream of the dam. So this is actually a red we took a photograph of just above where the dam was. When the step pools were removed and taken out by the flood, we were left with places that were not necessarily easily to grow. So this is one of the bigger jumps of water. The water is basically jumping from like here down to the level down there. It's about a 10-foot drop. And I was concerned whether the fish were going to be able to make it past this small cascade. The fish were quite able to do so. So we actually saw that even though we didn't have these nice step pools, fish were quite happy to go above and see what the river provided. Remember the fact these fish evolved for over thousands of years to live in the Carmel River. The Carmel River knows how to feed fish. When we took the dam down, we actually allowed for a lot more movement of biology. But it also means we now have movement of invasive species downside of removing a dam. So with the species, are a picture of striped bass. This is a picture I took just below where the dam is, where the dam was. So this is a picture just after the dam removal. The striped bass moving upstream. We now know the striped bass can access above the dam now because we're being blocked by the dam. So our stilling can go upstream, but still can the striped bass that actually feed on the stilling. Fortunately, striped bass have not been much of a problem the last couple of years, so they still potentially be involved. Also, other invasive species like New Zealand mussels are now basically in the area where the dam was, and very past there. The bugs, we actually did a set of surveys looking at aquatic invertebrates and streams. Aquatic invertebrates are a nice indicator species to help you tell you whether the stream's in good condition or not. The state of California basically relies on aquatic invertebrates to basically judge the aquatic health of a stream system. You don't have fish everywhere. You always have bugs within the streams. And we've seen slight improvements in the bug conditions. But they haven't completely recovered, partly because there's sediment. We talked about the fact that sediment has not been restored yet, and it's also not necessarily the restoration of temperature or nutrients. So speaking of that sediment, speaking of vegetation, so this is a picture of just above where the dam used to be, looking upstream. Here, the picture on the left is 2018. This is 2022, so 4 years later. And same place, hopefully is back in the boulders here, boulders there. As you can see, the fact that the trees have, wonderfully recovered for like even 4 year span. Not to the point where they're fully grown yet, but you do see, where the banks have been bare and here, a couple years after restoration, here the alders have grown in quite thick. So it's hopeful that we'll have shading at some point. So at some point, these trees get a little more mature, a little taller. We'll begin shading the stream from off and then straight shade the stream off. It'll help restore the temperature. Right now, the temperatures of the streams will be a little warmer because it's getting more sunlight and and we'd also see more algae because it gets more sunlight. We went through and we inventoried habitats for the entire area above the dam for several years. This is basically showing you again 2017, 2018 on the right, and 2022 on the left. 2018 on the left, 2022 on the right. And you can see essentially, though, in terms of habitat types, paired with pools and reds, and fast water and ripples or cascades in blue. And you can see that there's a pair of diversity of different flow habitats across the river both years. You see a slight increase in the complexity of the river as the river's got gets more time to actually work the sediments. We see the formation of alternate side channels and stuff. But by and large, it's been relatively well restored. When we look at the bottom habitat, though, in the area above the dam is really dominated by these boulders. Boulders are everywhere you look. There's hardly any spawning gravel at all still in this area. So spawning gravel will enter and will basically shoot straight through and keep on going down straight until the river kind of comes to some equilibrium where it has spawning gravel being delivered at the same rate as it's being used. We won't see spawning gravel probably accumulate. When we see the same problem, if we look at below the dam, this is the area below the dam, and it's not quite so bouldery. This is what the Carmel River would look like more naturally, but still, there's not a lot of spawning gravel. So you look, you can see the rocks that are standing here. The rocks are still kind of dinner sized, but it's huge boulder. But there's not a lot of spawning gravels that occur in this area below the dam, because again, we still have not just reestablished that sediment. So to summarize, moving the dam changes the flow of water. We restore the flow of water. The sediment takes a little longer. Animal plants have seen some large improvements, but nothing huge. And nutrients we haven't even checked on yet. Looking at the bottom habitat, upstream has done much better than downstream. There's not necessarily much change. The temperature, water temperature has improved over where it was. So in terms of lessons learned from the dam removal, so restoring processes takes time. And so when we look at biology, the book of biology, this is a process, but it's still to return, move upstream. As it takes time for the stillhead to actually, reestablish themselves and actually produce enough stillhead that you actually, in that time, is relatively healthy return as adults. And in fact, to get successful reds, we require the sediment, and sediment takes time for that to happen. We also had the fact that dams interact with other stressors. So during this period of time between 2018 and 2022, we had a period of drought, we had periods of rain, and how the river responds kind of depends on whether you're in drought, wet season, and wet season or dry wet season of drought. Yeah. Fire obviously has an effect. Fire is an important role in this environment by actually providing those sediments into the river, as well as other human stressors. The fact is, we've removed one dam, the Los Padres Dam is just upstream of it. All the effects that we've had with the dam, we're still having a Los Padres Dam just upstream. So other thing we learned though, storing fine sediment works. Moving the river actually worked out. We actually kept those fines out of the river. Although we still end up having a sediment problem, not having enough fine drought. It's been to have sand with fog and everything. But I would argue one of the biggest things is we shouldn't tell the river how to do its job. We spend an awful lot of money building those step pools that lasted essentially about a year. So, when we do restoration ought to be done with the eye toward what is the river going to do naturally, and let the river build upon the river's natural processes, as opposed to trying to impose our own will on the river and say, "What river look like this?" And I think at that point, I want to acknowledge the fact that most of the work that I've shown you here wasn't done by me, but done by undergraduate students in my lab. In fact, this is one small group of them, but there's probably 20 or 30 if I captured all the ones that worked on the project over the couple of years. And with that, I'll stop and take questions. The pictures you were showing, how far below this plan or above the do not all the way right. Usually speaking, below them, we were within about 500 meters. And above the dam, we were probably within 1,000. So what happened? Yeah.
What is the expected removal of those others dams to the regeneration of the same river?
Well,
That's the topic of our fourth talk.
This talk will lead into that talk. So just to answer the question, I think moving Los Padres Dam obviously would help reestablish sediment. It might solve some of the sediment issues, not solve them, but begin moving towards solving them. So, right now, there's not really any real big sources of sediment entering the Carmel River between Los Padres Dam and the San Clemente Dam. So, you needed then a source of gravel was coming in after we established that flow of gravel in Gulf River.
Yeah, question. Thank you, John, for your presentation. How was the sediment that was trapped behind San Clemente Dam prevented from going into the rerouting river?
So mostly it was just plantings. So they graded it. You saw they actually they had a relatively gentle grade. So and the sediment itself is relatively porous, so water would not actually run over land. It would just soak in. And with just plantings on top of that, in order to make sure that the vegetation stabilizes the sediment. They did one of the things they did. I think it was really improvement when they planted all these plants in San Clemente. Is they actually put in irrigation. The large irrigation system basically allowed these alders basically to get a head start even when during dry years. They had basically the irrigation system. So the irrigation system was actually designed partly to help develop that vegetation across this hill slope that we created with the sediment.
And why didn't the river go back to its own channel?
We just gave it a better option. When we got to the point where it was no going to go right, we built a much steeper downhill to the left. So it would just naturally go. Rivers just like us, naturally tend to take the easy route and walk down.
So the climate's been in the news a lot recently. How did this work to influence decisions on that? How do your findings relate to what's happening?
In terms of climate,
Climate. And what actually happened there.
So, the climate didn't try to do any the sediment route. And they let the sediment go and go downstream. It's one of those things where there's a argument to be made to bypassing the sediment is expensive, and they had a much larger sediment pool. But they may not have had an option of actually bypassing. We had the San Clemente Creek that was parallel, so we only had to make a small nick in a bridge line in order to make that river work. Where for the climate, they may not have that option to go around. And I would also say that while fine sediment is a problem in a river, it's a temporary problem. It's one of the things with fine sediment, will probably only be in the river. I would argue, even in the large circumstances, there's probably a single decade. So a single decade, maybe from our point of view, may be a long time, but from an ecological or geological point of view, it's one, right? So it's allowing the sediment to go downstream is probably not the end of the book. We avoided it in this case, but given the fact that we still have sediment problems, arguably we didn't actually solve the problem by going around so. Yeah.
Well, it's a corollary question with sediment. It's a two-part question. So, question here on the Los Padres. Have you had a chance to look at the type of sediment that is captured in Los Padres? And is it primarily the good gravels, or is it primarily the not so good sediment? That's the first question. Second question is, of what you just described, the sediment that might move downstream that Los Padres was removed, would that have the potential to raise the floodplain for those 10 years? And if so, has that been looked at?
So, first question. Multiple questions. Well,
good gravel, so
have we looked at Joe? But knowing what the geology is, it's likely that it's predominantly fines. The rocks here weathered relatively fine grained material. And would necessarily have a lot of good gravels. So there are some good gravels in there, but there are also lots of fines. So going back to your second question about floodplain upgrades, I do not know if that's been done yet. I've got my suspicion, no. I know the Municipal Water Management District has been modeling the Carmel River and have done some model studies to see what the hydrology would be like. I don't know that they've actually done the sediment pieces of that. and looking at how, because yes, I mean, you expect the fines coming downstream have to cause some aggravations, and basically raising the bed in some places as the fines work their way through the system.
So in some of those other 1,000 dams that have been removed, has there generally been a tracking of the sediment flow through there and that the floodplain has been?
The floodplains, I'm not aware of any examples of dam removals resulting in floodplain aggregation to the point where there's a problem. I did a study in Utah, dam removal in Utah, back when I was a grad student, and we were looking at how the sediment was actually entirely removed within a year. It's one of the things where it wasn't a huge dam, but it was within a year it basically had been removed, and there was no detectable no really detectable finding material. It's just all about
Which river? Which dam?
Blacksmith Fork. So could it happen? Yes. Is it likely? Given the fact we've done 1,000 dam removal and I've seen it might be happening. So far, I would argue it's probably yes.
So what's the ultimate goal when you remove a dam?
Well, I mean, ideally we want to restore the stream and the ecosystem back to some version of its natural self, or something at least sustainable over time.
But in order to do that, a whole lot more dams need to be taken down. I think just removing one dam isn't going to do that. You've got to remove the next, and then the next, and the next. You've got miles of it.
Well, certainly, well, in our case in the Carmel, we have one more.
Yeah.
So you're right. There's still one more dam that has to be.
Can you explain? I think this is a good topic too. Is there's two different types of dams. One managed by the Army Corps, and there's the water supply, right? If we're looking at flood control for a population, that's different than what we renew. Right. And I think that there's a good comparison to discuss. Because you can't just remove the dam and then have a flooding.
Right. So that's what it is referring to is like a broad variety of uses. So flood control is usually one use of the dam. Hydropower could be another use. Water supply would be another use. So how what the purposes of those dams were is one consideration we thought about when taking down a dam. How are you going to replace whatever function that dam did? How are you going to replace that function within your system? Are you going to basically give up more floodplain, allow the river to flood? If we remove flood controls dam, so we can find another source of water to remove a water source of the dam. The problem with the dam, though, is dams are relatively. We look at dams. Dams are relatively temporary. San Clemente lasts 100 years. Los Padres dams would last maybe 100 years. So you pull it down. We look at a dam again. 100 years is a long time, but 100 years really is not that long. My father was born before San Clemente Dam was built, and basically had his life basically here in San Clemente Dam with one person like me. So when you think about our grandchildren, or great grandchildren, putting a dam in and expecting a dam to be there for the great grandchildren, it probably be all the best survival. No, they'll still have the best.
It's not being from this area. What was the purpose of this dam?
This dam with water supply. Yeah, so
For farmers.
no, for this one and for actually to the Del Monte Hotel, but it originally water supply.
Does climate change have an impact?
Climate change could potentially have an impact. I would argue it's not had one yet. As we see changes in precipitation, as our precipitation becomes more uneven, we end up having more droughts and more really heavily wet seasons. We'll face challenges of trying to control floods in situations.
I'm familiar with Idaho and Henry's Fork Foundation, Henry's Fork.
Right.
And it's water supply for farmers.
Right.
So they work with the farmers to say, if you don't use it, you're not going to lose it anymore. You just take what you need.
Right.
And then moving on down because the droughts are having an effect. There's not as much moisture, and that has an effect on the temperature of the water because there's less water
And it's hotter outside, so it evaporates sooner, so it affects the whole ecosystem all the way down. And that's the problem that's being dealt with there. Seems like this is a little bit different.
Yeah, this is some different, although our Spanish River is more similar to the English River.
Yeah. With Callahan what's the situation with them and will it help when they stop taking water, or are they going to stop to take the water?
Well, that's a good question.
Callium has a right to a certain amount of water, 3,600 acre feet. The challenge was that the demand was much greater than that. The Carmel River was the only source of water for the Monterey Peninsula. And so they were put under an injunction or fines to get back down to that 3,600 acre feet. And they have been under that amount for quite a while since the recycled water. I don't know the date because I've only been here for a year, but they've been down to their amount. It's interesting too because you can look at all the well users. There are a lot of different users of the Carmel River, and each has a designated amount. And that's an interesting question to be plumbed a little bit later.
Well, as the reservoir filled in with sediment, it became less and less useful for
Right.
water supply.
Yeah, right.
Basically, outlived its use.
One of the interesting questions or complaints that I've been getting up and down when I talk to people about the river and the dams is, gosh darn Cal-Am, they haven't been doing maintenance and taking all the sediment out of the dams. Apparently they think we can go up and just vacuum it out. It's a naturally occurring thing. And as you can see from all the dams that have been coming out, a lot of these dams are reaching their 100-year end of infrastructure use. One of the things that's interesting, is that when the San Clemente Dam project started, it started because it was no longer seismically safe. So it was nothing to do with the fish. I mean, all those things were good, but it was really because it was not seismically safe. So what happened was Cal-Am came up with a proposal to fix the dam in order to make it seismically safe. And that was really before this big flood of dam removals happened. So it was not a given to take that dam out. And the environmental groups said, well, wait a minute, why don't we look at taking it out? So the Carmel River Watershed Conservancy funded a study, it's about this thick, with all the environmental reasons of why we should take the dam out. And that was then used. I don't know if any of you have ever applied for a federal grant, but they require a lot of stuff. And so that research report was used to justify the funding needed and to help bring the funding needed to bring the San Clemente Dam down. So it's interesting because when I came in with the Carmel River Watershed Conservancy, I asked all our different partners, what do you want from us? What value do we bring and what can we do for you? And the head of the Steelhead Association said, you have to stop being a stealth organization. You do all this stuff in the background and nobody knows about it. So we're working to change that. I also want to tell you about something that happened after this that affected it, if you don't mind. We also have something called the Carmel River Task Force, which 25 years ago was formed to help all the different partners work together. And there have been different leaders over the years. At the moment, we're leading the Carmel River Task Force. And the task force looks at our watershed report card that CSUMD does and gets together and then talks about what are the priorities for the health of the river. And one of the priorities that came up a couple of years ago was, and just try after you've been drinking a little bit to say this 10 times fast or even twice, fish passage barrier. So what happens is this is not the only barrier that's been on the river. So one of the things that happens is the fish like to go up in the summers and get up into the cooler waters under the trees in the mountains and spawn and do all their business. And the Carmel Valley, the Carmel River was blocked, but you have all the tributaries that go up into the San Clemente Mountains. You have all the other creeks. They were also blocked, not by a Cal-Am dam. They were blocked by landowners who were like, I want to be able to put a road here so I can get my Humvee over, from one side of my land to the other. And those were built by private landowners that had no thought for the fish. And so the group of people working with the Carmel River Task Force set that as a priority. They identified 10 different fish passage barriers and over to Arias Creek, Finch Creek, all these different creeks. And then funds from California Fish and Wildlife were matched by a fund that came from the fines, the Callium fines for more pumping. And so it was, I don't know, was it about $10 million? No, probably more than that, because it was about $1 million each. Very expensive to take those fish passage barriers out and put in new structures or bridges or things like that. And there has been some really interesting data about the fish going up in those directions. And so at our last, we had a meeting with the Carmel River Task Force a few months ago, I think it was August, focused on the health of the steelhead. And people were commenting on how they were seeing, anecdotally, they were seeing a lot more fish in the tributaries and in the creeks than they had seen in the past. And that might be the reasoning, and we're going to be studying this, that might be the reasoning why we're not seeing as many fish hitting up at Los Padres Dam. So the numbers of Los Padres Dam have been going down. Is that because there are fewer fish and it's a crisis, or is it because they've all been going up into these newly free areas in the fish passage? So these are things that we're studying on an ongoing basis, and just doing what we can to make sure that all these different, I mean, it's not easy. It's a complex system, right?
I can kind of give you a boots on the ground report. My name is Steve Park. I'm the president of the Carmel River Steelhead Association. We do fish rescues. We do burial removers. We do quite a bit in the system. In this last year, we stopped rescuing because the tributaries restabilized, but we stopped at 13,000 fish. Those fish are all released into a system, in part of the system where it's wet all year round. One of the reasons why they may not want to take out the Los Padres Dam is that very reason. We have a section of river that runs from the Los Padres down to where the San Clemente, well, it runs all the way down to Rosie's Bridge here in the village. That is wetted all year long. It's the only refuge that's guaranteed in the entire run of the Carmel River. We are now seeing, and this would be related to the San Clemente Dam being removed, we are now seeing Pacific lamprey up into the tributaries. They typically could not get past the San Clemente Dam historically. So we're now starting to see those in some of the tributaries, the Cachao and the Finch. We are also, just recently, I was in the main stem of the Carmel River out in the Cachao Valley and walked up on a beautiful pair of spawning steelhead. And this is only after we've had a small flow attraction. So we are seeing a good spawning adults in the area, at least in our perspective. We are seeing the Pacific lamprey. And in general, if people ask me, they say, well, is it better off since the dam is gone? It's probably too early to tell. It's been almost 10, well, it has been 10 years. So that seems like
modest improvements.
Yeah, it seems like 10 years would be something you could count on, but it takes time for this to reestablish itself and make its move back in the right direction. But from what we're seeing, especially like on our last rescue, it looks very promising. It looks like the fish are starting to reestablish themselves. And interestingly enough, and Elise, you just brought this up, at the Los Padres Dam, we have what's called a ladder and a trap. So the fish go up an artificial ladder, which is like a waterway, and they get into a trap, and then they're removed physically from that trap and taken up to the reservoir and put in, and then they can go through the reservoir and up into the watershed. Last year, we had 4 fish in the trap. I would say in a 20-year average, we probably had 50 to 70 would be typical. So what happened? Why did we only have 4? The San Clemente Dam was gone. You would think that the fish migration would be much greater. Well, what we're starting to see now is that the Cachao and the Finch, which are a couple of the major tributaries, are starting to show quite a few fish, at least quite a few compared to nothing. So, there are some very positive and direct signs that it might be established at this point in time. But again, it's a long time. It's a long trip.
Another complaint that I frequently hear, and I'd love to have it, it seems clear from the history that I didn't know. A lot of people downstream talk about, oh gosh, they didn't do anything to manage sediment, and I had flooding at my house ever since the dam came down. Can you give me an answer for that? It seems quite clear that you worked on the sediment quite a bit. I'd like to know the right thing to say to that.
Well, and so, yeah, arguably they did everything they could do, but so they certainly managed some better than most places do. I got much better. But fact is, we moved the dam. Yes, you end up, you end up going from a 100 foot relatively flat, or small hills, small dotted one. A little bit of flood, you would dry, a little bit dry. Now you have big floods. So for moving dams are going to create more flooding than you have without it. So it's one thing where you build your house and you make your decisions about how you're going to where you're going to live based on when you have a dam. You have to understand that things are going to change from day to day. So even if all dams are going to have some effect on floods, even if that's not what they're designed for. But one of the downsides of moving dams, we also have to basically adjust the way you do it down previous. But
That was kind of my question, because it's hard to imagine that there wasn't much sediment coming down with those huge flows in 2023. Certainly, the river looks a lot different after those big flows of that year. So I kind of always assumed a lot of it is coming from the removal of the dam, but that's not really what you're saying.
Yeah, so that's,
Okay.
I mean, there has been some modest amount of change in the river profiles downstream. So we actually go through and, Doug Smith has been doing it for about almost 20 years, I guess. They've got a long record of basically going out and measure, the same places in the river the same way over multiple years. And yes, we see places where the riverbed has degraded for maybe a foot or two, or degraded a foot or two, with relatively small changes compared to it. We don't see much of this.
Well, it strikes me that the removal of the dam should be part of a larger plan, larger project. And I'm thinking, because I'm familiar with the projects that are going to be starting in the lower river, which is the Powell Road, and the Carmel River Freely. A large part of that is, the goal is to prevent flooding by providing more area for the river to spread out during high water flows, and try to reestablish some wetlands that can act as sponges to hold that up.
A functioning floodplain, yes.
What?
A functioning floodplain, yes.
A functioning floodplain, exactly. And so in the future, it might make sense when a dam removal is going to be done to incorporate this type of planning as well, to give that additional flow someplace to go. Fairly, relatively close to the dam, so it doesn't affect people downstream. It's just an idea.
Well, I mean, you're basically, telling me the dream of every water ecologist. Basically, if we want to do restoration right, we wouldn't say, I have a little spot, I'm going to fix this spot. We would look at the entire watershed and say, okay, for this entire watershed, where's the water go? Where's the sediment come from? Where's biology going to go? And fix the entire watershed at one time, as opposed to trying to do one spot at a time. Ultimately, though, we only have one spot where we can fix, where we actually have access to the river and a chance to fix itself.
Well, the other point to that too is that what you're looking at are big projects based on ownership and money. And, we're used to, I guess in the last 100 years in the whole industrialized, we're like, okay, we're going to control water. We're going to have it come down this channel. We're going to put houses on it. We're going to have a dam up here. We're going to provide the water. We're going to stop the floods. We're going to manage the whole thing. And we've learned it doesn't really work. What we really want to do. And there's something now, the term they have is slow water, that fundamentally rivers like to change. They like to go like this. They like to go out into the floodplains. They like to come back. And we've been fighting against that for a long time. The challenge is that while we can affect CalAm to take that dam down, how do we work with all those people up at the top who have been doing processes that speed the water up? So this is actually a program that we're working on right now and we're launching in terms of river stewardship, because we need everybody in the river. So rather than having a concentrated owner of one or two spots, we need everybody that has stewardship within the watershed to slow water down. To not just put big concrete pads, to have places to sink water. The basic concept are slow it, sink it, spread it. I actually had someone when I was up at my last river, the Russian River, when I was with the Russian River Complex, I had a landowner call me and say, after the last storm, the river going through my property changed course and I lost about 2 feet of land. When is the county going to pay me for my loss of land? That's really unclear on the concept. Whatever you get. Because this is such an important topic and we're going to be really focusing on this here on our 25th anniversary. April 6th, we're bringing in for the first time a National Geographic explorer. Her name's Erica Geese, and she's going to be at Palo Corona speaking on the slow water movement. And so we've expended quite a bit of resources to bring her in, and her brilliance around this project. She's been studying slow water around the world for a decade. So I hope you'll all join us for that, as well as next one. Any more questions?
Okay, for the dam removal, what were the funds
It was a combination of federal, states, CalAmp. It was a big project like that requires a lot of collaboration.
that'll change.
No.
We'll pour a little bit.
Right.
One thing I'd love to get your take on this. I'm more of a visual observer, not a researcher. I take care of the property on the river. And when I started, we would stick willows in the banks before the dam was removed. And that protected the banks. And since 2017-18, I've seen a significant shift, and that could be high flow the last few years. But the banks seem to be a lot stronger, more stable now below the dam, and where it was removed. And you say the river, Mother Nature does what it wants to. And my visual observations over the 15 years of managing this property seem to agree with that. Is that dam has only helped benefit the health of our watershed and our area when we manage our property. And it's been impressive to see. That's just my observations. But, less trees that would be planted, and more nice stabilized banks.
So the trees are actually help stabilize the banks, though, or that was your?
I think that the trees were shading the watershed and protecting the banks when the dam was there. Now that the sediment's been able to move down and hold up some of our land, I've seen a more stable. Yeah,
I would mention that there are 2 good books. One is called Cadillac Desert. It really speaks well to the dams and what that was all about. The other is A River in Ruin, which is written by a local person, Ray March, about our Carmel River. And both of those books, if you want to get caught up to speed on what's going on, they're both really good reading.
Other question?
I would like to thank our watershed fellow from Monterey Institute, Aaron, for helping us set this up. Postcards on the table, feel free to take them. They're just beautiful pictures and postcards you can send people. We are going to be doing more of these talks, so there's one every month here. The next one is desalination. We're also going to be launching a podcast, so we have a lot coming out for our 25th year, a lot of new programs, so keep your eye on our website, carmelriverwatershed.org. And I also have a sheet around here somewhere, which invites you to tell us more topics that you want to hear about. I'm looking at it going, well, let's talk about the price of water. Let's talk about desalination, which is the next one. So we're going to have a lot of different topics. So please feel free to leave us the topics that you'd like to hear more about.
Thank you, Elise.